Hello YouTube, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, Helen the Russian here, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. It's beautiful sunny day in Las Vegas, not very hot, only 93 degrees high expected today, which is fantastic for us in late June, but it is windy. Anyhow, today is a bit of a holiday, so let's not talk about stressful things like rideshare. Why don't we go back to a bit of Las Vegas history? I mentioned before that I live in Green Valley, pretty much right next to Sunset Park, and Sunset Park actually has a great deal of historic significance, and it has to do with the artesian springs that lay just beneath it. I did talk about how Las Vegas was discovered. Las Vegas means meadows in Spanish, and originally the area now known as Las Vegas was discovered back in 1829 through 30, right around that time. There was a trade caravan led by Antonio Armijo. It had about 60 people and 100 mules. They were going from Santa Fe to Los Angeles, and they stopped here because they discovered the artesian springs. Now that particular trail was later recognized by the Congress as Old Spanish Trail, Old Historic Spanish Trail. But in the meantime, back to Sunset Park. So there were 5 scouts sent ahead to search for a place to stop, obviously where there is water. They were hoping for water, and they did find it. Now, one of those 5 scouts was Rafael Rivera, who actually named Las Vegas the Meadows. Despite the fact that Antonio Armijo led the caravan, it was Rafael Rivera who named the area because he was one of the scouts sent ahead. They actually discovered, funny enough, although Rafael Rivera especially is credited for discovering the springs, they never seen the big springs. What they did find was the Duck Creek, and Duck Creek collected big pools of water from the rainstorms and from natural springs. So they call it Salty Arroyo, that the caravan did. In fact, it was, I think, January 9, 1830, when there is an entry in the diary that said, to the Salty Arroyo without incident. There is a Spanish translation, but I don't speak Spanish. I don't want to bastardize the language, so I'm not going to say it in Spanish. Anyhow, and then they moved on to Las Vegas. They mapped it as to Los Angeles. They mapped this area around Duck Creek that they discovered as a good place to stop for water. So that's how Las Vegas was actually first, not really established because they didn't build anything, but discovered. So the area was discovered, it was named Las Vegas, and that was for a long time. I talked about it in one of my previous videos. For a long time, there wasn't anything in here. But anyhow, and then there was, and it's an entirely different story. I talked about it later. But now moving forward nearly a century, before 1907, there was only part of Duck Creek springs where the water flowed above ground. And so the area was absolutely not developed and no one lived in here. By then there was already a railroad built, but a railroad only supplied water to Las Vegas Valley, Las Vegas townside. And so no one wasn't here. And then in 1907, Vegas Artesian Water Company, Water Syndicate, they drilled their first successful well, and then the water literally gushed out, and that was the first well in what is known as Paradise Valley. Speaking of which, like technically every time I post something on social media from where I live, the tag is Paradise, Nevada. I literally live in Paradise, Nevada. How's that? I love that personally. I always use that tag instead of Las Vegas, Nevada. I just think it's so much cooler. But anyhow, so the underground waters of Paradise Valley were discovered, and picture this. Government was giving free land to people who wanted to develop wells and grow crops. So you can literally move in this area and start a ranch and it cost you nothing but obviously the cost of the building, the cost of the developing crops, but water was free and the land was free. Can you imagine? Anyhow, and that good life lasted for a bit, but I have to say, not to say it was absolutely easy work, and some of the wells were not as productive. Crops were still, remember, we're still in the desert and the land is mostly caliche, so it was really hard to grow crops. Some ranches were successful, but mostly those ranchers who established ranches in here were people who lived in Las Vegas Township and only came to the ranch on weekends. Now remember, back then Las Vegas was just a small area around right where the downtown is now. There was a railroad station there. And so it was quite a hike back in 1908, 1910, 1915. So it was like going out to the country. So picture this, like right now it takes me 10 minutes through the airport connector to get to Las Vegas Strip. Well, back then it was you went to the country. I live in country. Anyhow, so that good life went on for a bit, and then I'm trying to think about it now, I think in 1940. Yes, it was in 1940, the state ordered wells to be kept and they started charging for water, which didn't stop people living here, obviously, but situation shifted quite clearly. Just to mention how many people lived in here, actually a fair few. By 1912, there were nearly 100 wells dug, so it was all going pretty good. In the meantime, little towards the other side, but it has to do with Sunset Park as well. Black Canyon was a perfect site for a dam on the Colorado River. However, it was in the middle of rough, rugged country, far away from any source of supplies, building materials, anything. Back then there was no Boulder City. And so the first step to building a Hoover Dam was the fact that the Union Pacific Railroad, so that one of the major railroads through Las Vegas, they built a 19-mile long spur from its main line to the Boulder City town site. So they started building in September 1930, and it was finished in 1931. And it angled through Paradise Valley, where you can still see the railroad now, and there's still trains going in there from time to time, not very often, I must say. So that was a big major step, because now there was a way to deliver people, supplies, building materials to the site, and there was massive step towards building a Boulder Dam. Now called Hoover Dam because it was President Hoover who signed it into effect, and so it was named after him later on. Now, there was, I'm going to look up a bit more, there are some other facts that I find interesting about Sunset Park, and it has to do with the ownership, just so people quite clear who owned what and for what reason. But before I get to that, those of you who've been to Sunset Park, we still have the sand dunes in a large area of the park. And those particular sand dunes that we have, they kind of moon shape. They call barhans, and the reason I know that is because I am originally from Baku, which is kind of deserty part. It's next to Iran, neighboring Iran, on the seaside of the Caspian Sea, and we had a lot of areas with sand called barhans. They're also specific, the moon-shaped ones, and they were created by wind blowing the sand over the base of mesquite trees and forming those moon shapes. And usually the points of the moon point away from the prevailing winds. So it is just little piece of knowledge of what's called what, and you can still some of those in Sunset Park, and the area is preserved. There is a reason they're not removed. They're not going to be removed. It's now a protected area, and it's part of the whole beauty of Paradise Valley. Now back to the who owned what and what all went on. So John Miller, the first owner of the land that later became Sunset Park, he came to Vegas on the first train in 1905, and he built the Hotel Nevada, which he later called Salsagev, which is Las Vegas spelled backwards. I mean, he was a funny guy, I guess, and wanted to give things an interesting names. Just so you know what it is, that hotel is Golden Gate now. So it's still there, still standing. So you can picture the distances and what was happening. Now, he lived in Las Vegas with his wife and 7 children. Quite prolific man he was. So what he did, he was a good businessman, and obviously if any of us lived back then and had any kind of money, we would take advantage of that too. So he took advantage of the fact that the land was free in Paradise Valley, and he drilled 9 wells. So he took advantage of it, obviously stake out the territory, drilled 9 wells, and he had 440-acre ranch. Picture the size of it, right? 440-acre ranch. So, and he saved the water from the wells. He put the water in 3 large reservoirs. Not all of his wells were very productive though, so he could only irrigate about 100 acres. He tried to sell the ranch in 1929, but the times were hard, despite all the boom that had to do with building the Hoover Dam. Times were difficult, and so he did not sell it until 1939, and that's when it was purchased by J.K. Hustles, who owned the Las Vegas Club. We all know that place, right? So that's how the ownership of that area started, and J.K. Hustles Sr., let's make sure we know who he is, he owned the ranch from 1939 to 1963, so quite a few years. He is, at one point, I think in 1961, he attempted to turn the ranch into the golf resort, but he couldn't get the permits from the government, and so he later sold the ranch to a group of investors that included Desert Inn owner Wilbur Clark. Of course, Clark County and all that. So there was another significant person who owned the land in what is known as Sunset Park now. That was Bill Tomiyasu. He bought land right next to Hustle's ranch, but despite his efforts, he really tried all he could to grow crops, but it was hard going, and he ultimately wasn't particularly successful. But his claim to fame, and then he was quite instrumental, that he has a plant list. He developed a plant list that is still used today, and a plant calendar, and a lot of it's still used today by Nevada Clark County for various different reasons. So that was significant. And now, how the ranch became a park. The ranch became a park in 1967. That's right. And it had to do with expansion of McCarran Airport and its subdivisions, and some people started to get worried about just how big airport's gonna get and whether or not we're gonna lose the natural beauty of what is known as Sunset Park now. So Mary Gravel Hubbard purchased 20 acres of Tomiyasu property. Now think from the very beginning when there were numbers like 440 acres. Now we're talking 20 acres, but she did buy it and developed a dairy herd, and she was the one who lobbied very heavily to turn it into a public park. So in 1967, Clark County purchased a 325-acre ranch and it used the funds from the federal grant, and those funds were matched with Paradise Town funds, and that's how it became Sunset Park. Originally, Mary Hubbard, she was so concerned about the area that she herself watched over the Sunset Park, trying to protect it from vagrants and people who stole the sand and destroyed the dunes, barhans. But later, and to this day, Clark County Department of Parks and Recreation provides the maintenance and management of the park. So there you go, brief history of Sunset Park. Now, I gotta tell you, a lot of people don't realize when the first successful well was drilled back in 1907, For many, many years, the water not only flowed freely, it had a really good pressure. So you had these fantastic springs with beautiful, clean, pure, amazing water just gushing out of the land, and the land was free and the water was free. I want to leave you with that thought. I mean, I live just, pretty much next door to it. Anyhow, happy Father's Day to everybody again, and everybody have a fantastic day.